Kia ora tātou. Ki mai ka ke mai hō mai te waiora ki au ki tū tāki wai orai. Anei rā tātou, e mihi ana ki a koe kei te rangatira Rangikaheke. Koe tēnei, kawe mai nei ngā mātauranga o te whakatupu Kumara, me te kō te ngākau, a te mea. Kaupapa nui tēnei, e tai ai e tātou katoa te whakamai, a tōna mai. We're happy to receive your mātauranga Rangikaheke on this important kaupapa, which has come to the fore in the last few years as we understand the danger of losing our own food supplies. My parents were great gardeners because they came from that generation where they had to grow food. Whereas me and my brothers and sisters felt that we were just the hired hands and we didn't have the same ownership. We all grew the spuds, you know, long lines of spuds, harvested them, and kumara, plum. They were really loved it. But I think all we held on to were the fruit trees and the fujovas and the flowers. So I've just recently at home put in a big raised garden, and I'm really keen to see how to improve my growing of kumara. See if I can pair it with raspberries, which is the middle row. I have found that the most expensive part is not the wood, which I thought it was, but actually the earth, which has been overcharged at all our gardens. So no mahara mai te rangatira, Rangikaheke. I know your unuku kōpapa o Rangitaurere, and go right through that area, and now close involved with the old Te Puia orchard, and hopefully I'll learn a great deal. No mahara mai, tēnā koe, mai.
Oh. Kia ora tātou. Tēnā koutou. E ngā mana, e ngā reo, e ngā karangatanga maha tēnā koutou. Tēnā koutou i runga i te kōrero rangatira mō tātou katoa, i runga i ngā tikanga o tēnā. Ko te tuatahi te wehi ki tō tātou matua nui i te rangi, moana manaakitanga ki runga i a tātou i ngā wā katoa, no reira tēnā koutou. Ki ngā mate o te tau, hinga mai, i ngā tu hari atu ki te tini, ki te mano no reira moe mai rā ki a tātou mā huetanga o rātou mā, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. Well, Rangi, thank you for the welcome. All our parents say we all had mara kai back in the day. They were great growers of mara kai, so they did one of two things. They were either fighting each other or they were growing kai. And they were good at both of those things too. Very good at both of those things. But just to give you a bit of context and a bit of background, my dad was born on Mokoia Island. Oh. And so they had mara kai, and they were able to grow kumara all year round on Mokoia Island. And that was because, and I was just saying to Rangitihi, that was because they had a perfect growing environment over there. They had all day sun, east facing they were. They had the island as a barrier to all the westerlies and the southerly winds. They had thermal, because Kumara loved the heat. They had perfect soil, volcanic soil, and the water back in that day was pristine. And around the edge of the lake, they were able to grow their tipu in the sand bed, and so it was already made for them. And during the week, my dad would leave there, him and his other whānau would leave there, and they'd hop on their horses and they would come across the lake and attend their school. And Rangitihi and I were talking about that Ranana School, which was on the corner of Tingai Junction there, and they hitched their horses up with the whānau and went to school for the week, hop on their horses at the end of the week, go back onto the island and look after their crops back on the island. So that's a bit of context, a bit of background for you. And then of course, when they moved off the island, our place of residence was on the edge, on the eastern edge of Lake Rotorua, down at Pikirangi, and we grew up there. And we had our whare there, and that was our tūranga waiwai, that was our papakainga. And again, we grew kai there, and we had, Dad had a couple of acres of kai there. We had orchards there, we had an orchard, and of course we had the lake to sustain ourselves on. So that's a little bit of background, but today I want to acknowledge Matariki, because we are in that phase at the moment. And Matariki is starting to grow bigger than it ever has been, and it will grow even bigger because whereabouts is our...
Yep. Oh.
And so, Matariki, as we all know, and I'm not going to dwell on this because there's a lot of online material about Matariki, but Pleiades, of course, as we all know, is the, you could say the Pākehā version of Matariki. But I think all of those who are here today will understand that cordial. It's been, I suppose, getting the story across to us in a number of different ways. And this is, I think this belongs to, I certainly didn't do it, it belongs to Professor Rangimā Pāmua, who has cleverly designed all of this just to get that imagery and that cordial of Matariki out across the nation. And I think he's done it absolutely well, and a beautiful way of doing it. Now, as we all know, Friday the 21st of June 2022 will be the first of a public holiday here in New Zealand celebrating Matariki. And so I'm letting you know that our organisation, which is Kai Rotorua, are joining hands next year on the Friday, the first part of that holiday, at Te Puea Orchard with the Japanese community here, and we will be bringing together the taniwha and the dragon, and we will be having a day of celebration up there with the Japanese community up at Te Puea Orchard out in Tikitere. And so that will be an all-day event, and we will be looking particularly at the Kumara and how the Kumara relates both to Japanese culture and to our culture here, Te Māori culture. So that'll be a big day, and we'll start to promote that on the way to the holiday next year here for Rotorua. That'll be one of the main activities. So who is Kai Rotorua? We're a non-profit volunteer organisation. We established ourselves formally in 2017. We're all volunteers, and the whole idea is to get people to grow food. We're not a food bank, and we don't provide food to the homeless because there's a lot of people already in that space. But what we do is we simply teach people to grow kai. And especially Māori because of our connection to the Whenua, to Papa Tuanuku, and that doesn't mean to say that Pākehā aren't privy to that either. They're very much involved with it. So it's been important for us to gather the troops and put together this whole idea about bringing people together to grow food. We concentrate on the kumara. Why the kumara? Well, I have to say, it's very difficult to connect Maori to a carrot. And very difficult. That's a huge job, you know. But when you start talking about the kumara, that's quite different, because the kumara is part of our DNA. It's part of our whakapapa. It's part of our way of the tāwhito. It's part, you know, it's part of our history. It goes right back. And so Māori start to sit up and listen when they hear the kumara being mentioned. And of course that goes into this area. O e tangi ana tama ki te kaimana wai o me tiki ake te palaha o kai hei a mai te pakeke ki utara hai wai u mo tama ki aho mai e tō tipuna au anuku whakarongo ko te kumara. Ko pari nui te rā ka hiki mata te tapu ai o tangaroa, ka pai mata te tapu ai o tangaroa, tangaroa, ka haruru. In the 1800s, that way of the tāwhito was composed then, and it gives a history of the kumara and the arrival of the kumara. So it has a whakapapa, it has a genesis, and that genesis is all part of Te Ao Māori. Our vision for Kai Rotorua is a resilient, well-nurtured, well-connected community. And our purpose is to reconnect us to Papatuanuku through the growing of kai. As I said before, you can't connect a Māori to a carrot, but that's the journey. The kumara is the starting of the journey and on the way to a carrot. And of course, we find that there are a lot of people now up at Te Puia Orchard with us who have arrived with the carrot starting off at the kumara. So what a great journey we're on at the moment. But where do we start with the kumara? Let's take this right back to the seed kumara and the planting of the tāpapa. Now down at Ohinemutu, we plant these seed kumara in what we call the tāpapa. And the reason we plant them down at Ohinemutu is because of the thermal heat down there. Kumara love heat, and anything below 14 degrees and they'll just leave it and say, I'm not going to be part of this. So they require that heat to get going. Now, just rolling it back a little bit, there are 3 of the kumara that made the journey across from Hawaii here to Aotearoa that are still about. That's the taputini, the huti, the reka maurua, and there are a couple of others. But these are the ones. Now, they weren't red when our people came across, they were white kumara. And so the red ones have been developed over the years and have become, there's over 800 odd kumara varieties throughout the world. But here in Aotearoa, these are the 3 survivors. So there's some lessons to be learned from the kumara. You know, they're great survivors. They've been all over the globe, and they've reinvented themselves all over the globe. And they've been taken on by the different cultures around the globe, and they're still here. These are some of the kumara that came on the waka that our people knew when they arrived. But you know, I often wonder about some of them, you see, because this is some of the information that was passed on from some of our forebears. And I wonder about the kumara called hitara, whether that was just a joke, you know, because hitara, of course, being Hitler, eh? And whether they threw that one in and said, here, take this kumara here is called hitara. whether they gave that as a joke or whether they were quite serious about it. But even Kai Pākehā would be an interesting one to really do some follow-up and see where that name actually came from. In 2016, we planted up 14 different variety up at Te Kumara Orchard, and these were the variety that we planted up, and they turned out fantastically well. We got a great harvest of them. Now, one of the things I didn't do when we went to harvest, this flower appeared on one of the 14 varieties that we grew, and it's very seldom that this flower appears. And so this one here was taken by a woman up north of some of the Kumara that she grew, and I'm really sorry that we don't have our own that we can compile and put into our library. But what a beautiful flower the Kumara produces. You know, the colours and the contrast are just absolutely amazing. Now, myself, we were, Jasmine and I, the founders of Kai Rotorua, and we became very good friends with this fellow here, whose name is Joe Gock. And Joe Gock, the reason that his photo is there with Jasmine and I is back in the 40s and the 50s, the Kumara were wiped out because it was hit by this fungi here, and it was completely wiped out. And Joe, at the time, was growing Kumara in Mangere in Auckland, and he decided to see if he could develop a cultivar. And so he did, he started playing around with it. And over at Owairaka in Auckland there was the DSIR. And he took this over after he'd been playing around with it for a couple of years. He took it to the DSIR and he said, have a look at this. And they came back to him in about 5 months time, and they said, we think you might have saved the Kumara, Joe. This is fantastic, but we need to run some more tests on it. And so they left it for another 6 months, and they called him back again and they said, we think you've saved the Kumara, you better come over here. So he went over to Owairaka where they were based, and they said to him, look, they said, you've done everything in this cultivar, this will be a long-lasting cultivar, Kumara cultivar. Why don't we name it after you? He said, I don't want a bloody Kumara named after me. It became known, this is Joe and his wife, beautiful couple. He's now 96, still alive, still sharp, he rings me up, and he says, what are you doing? And, you know, we'll get talking, but he loves talking. So I put the phone down and go and make a cup of tea, and then I come back and have a listen, he's still talking, you know. He's fantastic, he's a fantastic fellow. His wife has died since. But this Kumara here is called the Owairaka Red, and that's how it got its name, Owairaka Red. And he was the one, Joe was the one responsible, him and his wife were responsible for producing this cultivar, the Owairaka Red. Now we're doing, Kai Rotorua is doing a National Science Challenge. And one of the things that I'm working with a group from the National Science Challenge is we want to develop a cultivar that's particular to Te Arawa, particular to the growing environment here in Rotorua. And we have on board a fellow who has been Professor Richard Mython, who has had many years history with the sweet potato, but not the Kumara. And I said to him, look, we need to grow a cultivar that understands the growing environment here, that can grow really well here in Te Arawa, in Rotorua. And so that's what we're doing at the moment. We're developing that Kumara, that cultivar. It'll take us a couple of years to do that, but that's part of the mahi that we're also involved. I just want to talk about this process of growing from seed into what we call the taupapa there. Now, so we get these seed Kumara, and this is what they actually look like. If you go to the shop, you can buy them in amongst your clay there, but you sort them out And you can, if you have a look at all the eyes along there, that's where the seed will, that's where the tipu will come from. So you select those very carefully, and so each year what we do is we've got a fantastic relationship with Kaipara Kumara. We've just come back from Kaipara Kumara with all our seed. They give us all our seed, Kaipara Kumara. We went up there, we left here at 1 o'clock in the morning, we got back here the same day, 1:30 in the afternoon. We had 300 kilograms of seed kumara on the back of the truck, ready to plant up in our tāpapa next month, in August, sorry. So you look for that, you sort your seed out, and then you put it in your tāpapa here, and on the left one here, and you leave that in there for maybe about a month and a half, 2 months, and then the tipu will spring and come forward, and you take the tipu away from the kumara, and you start your planting process. And these are your tāpapa beds here. We've got a whole lot of them down at Ohinemutu, and we'll do this on the 1st or the 2nd of August. And I've always planted our seed kumara here on the 1st of August, and the reason for that is that it's my son's birthday, and he always reminds me, hey, you've got to get out there and plant your seed kumara. These are all our boxes down at Ohinemutu, and so on one kumara you should be able to get we get about 40 to 60 tipu of one kumara. And so we get quite a collection of them, and this is what they look like when they're fully grown and ready to harvest and take out of there. And so there would be quite a few. You saw the kumara in the bed there before, and this is what it actually produces. So what you do is you cut those away, we take them up to Te Puea, and we leave them out to harden off for about 3 weeks before we actually plant them. Now, the Rotorua Boys High School, along with Western Heights High School, along with John Paul College, are all stakeholders and partners of ours, and every year they come up to plant kumara with us. Last year when we planted up, I said to her, let's go around and count how many people have turned up today. There was 110 people that came up to Te Puea Orchard to plant up. And it was a fantastic day. We had business, we had communities, we had those kuta, we had Rotokawa School, we had Northwood Primary, we had a whole lot. So that is really starting to take on each year. These are the tipu up here in the left-hand, top left-hand corner. There is the tipu attached to the kumara, and you take them away into these bundles here. You put those in water and let them sort out, let them sit out in the environment, and let them harden off before you go to plant. Get them used to the cold weather and get. And this is part of our harvest, and so when COVID came and hit us, we gave 1,000 kilos of kumara to Kaharoa School, and we joined them and we put together. We made kumara soup, and we put that into containers, and then Kaharoa School gave that out to the community during the COVID when everybody was locked down. Our biggest kumara that we've grown out at Te Puea was 4.2 kilos.
Wow. Bigger than a pumpkin.
Now, last year when we planted up, a group from Waikato Tainui came across, Rauawa Kaumātua Trust. They filled the van up and all the kaumātua and the queer came across, and I got them to plant the first 2 rows of our crop last year, which they did. It was fantastic return. And of course, I went back there this year for one of their matariki Wananga, Kumara, Wananga recently, and this fellow came up to me and he said, "You remember me?" I said, "No." He said, "I came over last year to plant the Kumara with you fellas." And I said, "Oh," and he said, "You remember the tipu you gave us?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Yeah, here's the fellow. The one that he had was 4.8 kilos. They'd beaten us by 0.6 grams, eh? And so we're now in competition with Waikato Pride. So they've decided they want to come back again and have a laugh on us and bring their kumara back with us. But you know, I guess that's the journey that Māori have with reconnecting to the kumara, eh? As I say, you can't connect them to a karate, but you start getting them hooked, they get hooked on the kumara. So we need to look at very quickly at the ideal growing conditions that are required. And we need a warm, sunny spot, an all-day sun. The soil needs to be free draining, light porous soil, and into mounded rows. Today we use our technology that we use is polythene and weed matting, because you know, once those weeds get in there, boy, crikey, it's a hell of a job to try and sort them out. Once they overtake that in that environment, they take off. And the other thing is with polythene, we cover the mounds with them, and we cover after we've done after it's rained. And the reason for that is we want to secure the moisture from the rain into those mounds. We've never, in all the 5 years we've been planting kumara, we've never had to water, because we've locked that in with the polythene going across it. It also is a weed preventer, prevents weeds from coming through, and not only that, it retains the heat as the sun goes across. It's a great thing to hold the heat for the kumara, and the kumara just love it, eh? They love that environment. So that's the technology that we're using, but we're shifting away from that technology, because weed matting is not a good thing to use. And so what we're going to be doing this year is we're going to be looking at weed hemp matting, and we seem to think that will actually be much better for the environment and the sustainability of practices that we need to be across. And we'll use eco-jute as well. There's some trials.
Rangikaheke, so was the weed matting plastic? That way it's no good?
Yes, yeah, plastic, eh? And we want to move away from those practices. We want to become more sustainable. We want to be able to, you know, to show that we're really lining up with Papatoa and the environment.
What about charcoal?
Sorry?
Charcoal.
Charcoal's a very good, it's a very good growing medium, mate. And it helps. Actually, they used a lot of charcoal back in the day, and that was a heat retainer. Hey, it kept the heat. In fact, if you go over to Hamilton, to the Hamilton Gardens over there, Weed Puke has got the Mara Kumara over there in the Hamilton Gardens. It's a fantastic thing.